You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. It is that time again, the day after, the morning after a doubleheader of Monday Night Football action. I cannot believe we're still getting that nonsense, but another morning after that doubleheader action nonetheless, where we dive into all 32 teams, ranking them from worst to first through a tier list. Up on the screen right now, you are seeing last week's rankings. I cannot stress that enough with the amount of people that think I'm just showing you the entire list right off the get-go. This is last week's rankings. Coming out of week number 7 now, we will go ahead. We are going to change the screen over, clear out the board, and work our way up to the top. Again, tier list, it's done a little bit differently. It's not as simple as 32 to 1. So dive in the comment section. Let me hear your thoughts on this past weekend's games. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Let me see some of your rankings. If it's not 32 to 1, give me your top 10. Give me your top 5. Hell, give me your top 3. I don't even care. Give me a top something and fire away in that comment section. But starting with the number 1 overall selection category here, the teams vying for that number 1 pick in the draft here. We start at 32 with the Carolina Panthers, the Titans at 31, the Patriots at 30, the Browns at 29, Jags at 28, and then the Raiders to round out the group at number 27. The Panthers, they were actually a few spots ahead of this last week, but I decided to dump them all the way back to the number 32 spot following a 40-7 butt kicking courtesy of the Washington Commanders without their starting quarterback for a fair chunk of the game. At this point here, the Panthers, with this whole Andy Dalton experience after benching Bryce Young, have reached that point where the Andy Dalton fire has officially been put out, and I don't really know what is going on with this team anymore here. There's really not a ton you can take away positively from either the offense or the defense. You're now getting calls for the guy who people wanted benched just a few weeks ago to be brought back, and when he gets in the game, it does not get much better than what you had already been seeing. You couple that with the fact that your defense is flat out broken to this point. It feels like as you're making Marcus Mariota, of all people, in 2024 look like a guy who could be vying for an MVP candidacy, going for over 200 yards and a couple of touchdowns, and he was dealing in that game during certain stretches. So it is what it is with the Panthers. They are sitting at the bottom of the league, and I would not be surprised if at this point they're picking number 1. They have the worst point differential by a mile. They're the only team in the triple digits right now, and I believe they lead the Patriots by about 40 points or so. So they are far and away the bottom team in the NFL at this point. The Titans at 31, not too far ahead of them, with no franchise quarterback, no real threat of a running game because they can't really seem to open up lanes for Tony Pollard and company, and a defense that really can only bend so much until it finally breaks. The Titans at this point, I think, are probably considering who they're going to be moving at the trade deadline, because for what it's worth, they kind of have leftovers of a failed experiment to try to get Will Levis a decent attack, I would say, and with guys like Calvin Ridley showing, not necessarily that they're the happiest with the situation currently going on right now, and you have a DeAndre Hopkins sitting on the other side of that offense as well. You have some guys that you could possibly move to pick up some draft picks and start looking towards next season. At this point here, I don't really expect a ton. It's, it's more of just the rookie head coach going through the motions of a first season where the franchise quarterback is nowhere to be found. And again, defense, bend but don't break until it finally breaks, because the offense is really not doing much for you. It's unfortunate that the Mason Rudolph experiment didn't work out a little bit better for them. I thought maybe it would, but at this point right now, another team that's probably thinking more so about who they can move at the trade deadline to start looking towards the next season. The Patriots sitting at number 30, with Gerard Mayo calling the team soft flat out in a press conference after their loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Whether he's right or wrong, I will leave that up to he and the team to decide, but he has made his bed and now he has to lay with it, making those comments public. Hunter Henry is basically the only reliable target you have in the receiving game, depending on, and to be fair to Pop Douglas, he was sick in that game, but at this point, Hunter Henry is is like the security blanket, and then you really don't know what else you're going to get. I feel like Ramondre Stevenson probably shouldn't have been playing in this game. It did not seem like he was ready to be back, and this kind of felt like a forced thing more than anything, which tipped my cap to wanting to Ramondre for wanting to be a part of this game here, but it feels like maybe he probably shouldn't have been playing here. The defense is falling apart. They've allowed 73 points now in the last couple of games. You allowed 171 rushing yards on the ground. Drake May is basically your positives from this game here. That's basically all you can take away. It's Drake May and Hunter Henry coming out of that game against Jacksonville. Unfortunate stuff for New England, to say the least, but there is so much wrong with what's going on in New England right now, and it really starts from ownership all the way down to the bottom. You can't blame just the players. You can't blame just the coaching. You got to start with ownership, the GMs, the front office people. There is some questionable decision-making going on over there in New England, and I get a front row seat living in New England, getting to listen to New England sports talk and just what everyone has to say and how everyone has to feel. And I've got to say, growing up in the height of the Patriots dynasty era to now experiencing what is one of the craziest falls from grace I've ever experienced with anything, even going beyond sports as a whole, this is a wild scene to watch, and it just gets uglier and uglier as the weeks go by. The Browns at 29, they actually moved up a few spots this week despite their loss. They played the Bengals pretty tight, all things considered, but one of the rare instances where I think a team gets better when the starting quarterback goes down with an injury. Regardless of how you feel about Deshaun Watson, unfortunate injury to end his season, to say the least. But I do think this team might be better off not having the Deshaun Watson needing to be benched situation kind of circulating around the team week in and week out. Hell, Jameis Winston was made the emergency third-string quarterback. In my opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, and basically because they didn't want to have the whole Jameis Winston should be starting narrative kind of circling around them. I don't really see how that really does much in terms of getting that to go away, because regardless, people are going to chant for Jameis Winston. Regardless, people love Jameis Winston, no matter how good or bad he does play. But I think that it has to be one of the most ironic things ever that you lose both Deshaun Watson and Dorian Thompson-Robinson in the same game right after you put Jameis Winston on as the emergency third quarterback, and he comes in and leads a scoring drive. The irony of that is stuff that can only be found in fairy tale storybooks. But sure enough, here we are, and Jameis Winston's probably going to get to be quarterback one going forward for Cleveland. No matter what they tried to do to get away from it, the Browns have found themselves in this position, and it's comedy. The Jaguars at number 28, sitting at 2-5, Doug Peterson securing his job for at least another week and was allowed to board the plane to head back to Jacksonville. A lot of conversation about whether he was just going to be left behind in London if they allowed the Patriots to beat them. Brian Thomas Jr. continues to look great for this team here, and one of those guys that, talk about a steal in the draft, someone who was pegged by, it felt like, everybody to be going to the Buffalo Bills. Jacksonville ultimately swooping in, though, and snagging him before he could fall all the way down to Buffalo, and he has been fantastic. Big time speed, and honestly, at this point, fair argument, I think, to say that he has been one of the best wide receivers coming out of this year's draft class to this point with the way that he has played. He has showed up in flashes just about every single week, and I feel like he's getting more and more comfortable week in and week out. Tank Bigsby is honestly making a case at this point with Travis Etienne being out as to being the running back one for this team at this point. I mean, he's, at least from the last I checked, he's leading the league in yards per attempt at this point. I don't know if maybe that's changed between, Monday Night Football games going into this game here, but Tank Bigsby has been on a tear, and I think he deserves some credit for what he's been doing there. The defense tightened up against the Patriots as well. Whether you want to, give them more credit for that or not is completely up to you. If you want to say that they were facing the Patriots, then, fair enough. But that is some sort of positive to take away. Curious to see where this team goes from here, though, but a big win. Doug Peterson's around for at least one more week, and he got to fly back home with the Jaguars. At 27, to round out this first group, we have the Raiders sitting at 2-5. I think what sums up the current state of the Raiders situation, a team that I was really excited to see, and quarterback was my big concern, and I feel like I say this every week. I almost feel like a broken record saying it, but Desmond Ridder being signed onto this roster and getting a full-blown breaking news release from all the people around the NFL that report on things and it coming from the Raiders themselves. The fact that Desmond Ridder is the breaking news and signee for a new quarterback on the Raiders roster, I think sums up what this season has become for Las Vegas. You have a ton of talented guys on defense, but you decided for whatever reason to come into this year and not have a quarterback situation figured out. You went in with Gardner Minshew, with Aiden O'Connell. Neither of the two is working. Injuries are happening now. And Desmond Ridder is a very real possibility at this point for Las Vegas. The good news coming out of this week, it sounds like, according to the insiders, that Max Crosby won't be going anywhere. I know he's been a big conversation piece as far as trades are concerned, especially once Aiden Hutchinson went down in Detroit, but it sounds like Crosby's not going anywhere, so you at least have that. But right now, the Raiders are crashing and burning, and it's pretty ugly. Moving into the next group, we're looking at the struggle bus category here. Only 5 teams in this group this week, a smaller struggle bus. A lot less people riding the public transportation today. The Dolphins sitting at number 26, the Saints at 25, the Giants at 24, the Rams at 23, and then the Jets sitting at number 22. The Dolphins basically are just sitting in neutral until Tua gets back, which it sounds like it's going to be this next week coming up here. So I didn't move them up or down. I've just kind of held them in this spot the last few weeks. I will credit them for keeping things close against the Colts here, whether it was with Tyler Huntley or Tim Boyle. But until Tua is back in that lineup and things are going, you can't really judge this team. I will give them credit for hanging in there with Indianapolis. I mean, they literally took them to the very end of that game with that 16-10 loss. But I'm excited to see Tua back from a football side of things, just, because I think this offense will at least be able to operate in some sort of a manner. The run game looked pretty good this past week too, I should say. But it's exciting that he's going to be back and orchestrating this offense the way that he knows he can, the way that, Mike McDaniel wants him to do. So I'm looking forward to seeing what exactly happens with the Dolphins going forward here. But a team, again, that's been kind of just stuck in neutral on the struggle bus until we got the return of Tua. The Saints at 25, the team's been decimated by injuries at this point here. They are on the fast track to a full-blown rebuild, in my opinion here. Spencer Rattler struggled big time, and I think we have learned now in his last couple of starts, he's probably not going to be the long-term answer over there in New Orleans. He struggled big time with all the pressure that defensive front over there in Denver was throwing at him. Run defense was a sand sieve. There was just really not a lot going well. And again, injuries are what's really killing this team right now. Going into that game against Denver, I think you had 3 wide receivers that you were fielding on that roster, and there was just a big over-reliance on your tight ends and running backs to maybe put something together. It's not very easy to win football games that way. So it sucks to see where the Saints are currently right now, but injuries have really killed this team to this point. The Giants sitting at 2-5 at number 24. I think my big question here, and I'm trying to figure out why, and maybe it is just as simple as money, but my question is it time to move on to Daniel Jones? And it's not really, it's a rhetorical question, because in my opinion, I've been saying this for at least a year now, yes. But here we are, Brian Daboll reiterating he is still the guy. He gives them the best chance to win, and this is all despite watching your offense put up 3 points against your division rival this past week. This is another one of those teams that until they move on from what was a $40 million per year mistake, I'm expecting a full-blown cupboard is going to be emptied and cleared out at the end of this season type of situation. Whether it's just a flat-out cut, whether it's a trade, however the Giants decide to go about doing it, I would assume that Daniel Jones is not going to be the quarterback following this season. I'm going to assume Brian Daboll's not going to be around as well. It really feels like the Giants are on a fast track to just kind of letting the whole thing implode this season and moving on and starting fresh, which I honestly think is probably the best way for things to go. And me personally, I don't know what anyone else thinks in New York, and if you're a Giants fan, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I am pulling for Bill Belichick on the New York Giants as the head coach. I would love the full circle moment of him going back to New York, where he won a couple of his rings initially way back in the day as a defensive coordinator, and getting the opportunity to potentially win a ring with the team that he won rings with previously as a DC, but also the team that twice kept him away from having 2 more rings on his finger. I just think that full circle moment would be really fun, and that's kind of one of those fantasy booking things that I have going on for the Giants right now. Is it going to happen? I don't know, but I would love to see that. The Rams at 23, another one of those teams, injuries really get into this team, but getting a win nonetheless against a Raiders team that is basically just falling apart. I'm really, really excited to see what this team looks like with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back. I really think that the Rams could give some teams a run for their money offensively. You're getting a lot of play time and a lot of good effort and overall just production, I would say, from some of the young guys you have on the defensive side of things, especially up front. So this is a team that with Kupp, who I thought was going to be back this week, and it sounded like he was trending that way until literally like it felt like Saturday, and then all of a sudden it was just he's not playing. But I literally picked that game under the assumption that Cooper Kupp was making it back, and that was a big reason why I chose the Rams in that game. Thankfully they still won, but a big piece of that had to do with the assumption that made it sound like Kupp was going to be back and he was going to play. But maybe next week now we get to see Kupp, and then hopefully Puka Nacua not too far behind him, because I really think the Rams have an opportunity. Yes, at 2-4, a slim opportunity, but with the way the NFC is kind of looking right now, a lot of teams really not separating themselves in that side of the NFL, they have a shot at maybe sneaking in as like a number 7 seed, but they got to get Kupp back in Nacua sooner rather than later and get the ball rolling on offense. And then the Jets sitting at number 22 to cap off this group here. You fired your head coach. You went and got Davante Adams, and you are still losing football games. That offensive line is not where it needs to be, despite the amount of money you put into retooling that entire unit this offseason. Nothing is going right in New York. This is a literal disaster. All things considered, the expectations, the year-long wait that we had losing Aaron Rodgers last season, this season is going right down the tubes, and you go up against a Russell Wilson who has been dealing with a calf injury for the last month and a half now, maybe even 2 months to this point, and he comes in and, barring a few just errant throws on his own part, nothing in part due to your defense, had himself a really good first game with Pittsburgh. This is not what the Jets were supposed to be. I don't know where they go from here, but the media circus in New York must be absolutely incredible to watch. And you're 2-5 with Aaron Rodgers. This was supposed to be a different season. And it's already, I picked the Jets to beat the Steelers, which is also partially why I'm so upset about this. But at the same time, this was supposed to be different. And I'm out on the Jets at this point. I'll put my foot in the ground on this. I'm out on the Jets. I'm done believing. I thought there was a chance. I thought the Davante Adams was like the final piece to the puzzle, getting him. And I will say, things maybe did open up a little bit in the passing game. Breece Hall looked really good in that game as well. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. The Jets are going to Jets. They're 2-5, and they're about this close from realistically having no chance at finding themselves in the playoff come January. So that's where the Jets are, sitting at 22. Moving into the Jeff Fisher category, those teams flirting around that 500 record, maybe a little bit less, just on the outside looking in as far as the upper echelon of the group in the playoffs. We got ourselves at number 21, the Arizona Cardinals. At 20, we have the Bengals. At 19, the Colts. At 18, the Cowboys, who did not play this week. At 17, the 49ers. At 16, the Buccaneers. And then at 15, the Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm looking forward to talking to those Bucs with you in a second. The Cardinals at 3-4. Major credit where it is due to get the W in a must-win situation where a lot of people really had Arizona counted out in this matchup here based off what I was just kind of seeing from conversation around the NFL media world. It really felt like everyone was anticipating a good, comfortable victory for the Chargers here. But ultimately, and I know the betting spread was like -1.5 Chargers. I get it. But a lot of people were on the Chargers for this game. Kyler Murray continues to show that he can be an X factor. I think the biggest thing really for this Cardinals team, for them to be legit, is they just need more talent. And it's going to take them another season or two to really get to where they need to be, which is why I have them sitting at the bottom of this Jeff Fisher category. They're a team that's probably going to ultimately finish at best like maybe 7-10, maybe 8-9, but like 7-10 feels like a realistic record, all things considered, with some of the struggles that they've been having. And it's the defense really that worries me more than anything else. They caught a Chargers offense that is just really in a tough way and lacking some talent needed, but ultimately big win for them, major credit. Let's stop having Monday Night Football games that start at 9 p.m. when that game kicked off. Let's just stop doing that. The Bengals sitting at number 20, a lack of a consistent run game hurt this team in the matchup. They honestly should have won this game more comfortably, all things considered, with Deshaun Watson going down and just everything that's been going on with the Cleveland Browns offensively. This should have been a pretty easy walk in the park. I get it's a division rival matchup. The defense, especially the defensive front over there in Cleveland, is no slouch by any means, but there's a lot working against Cleveland right now, so this should have been a more comfortable win in my opinion. Chase and Higgins looked good. They combined for nearly 440 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Defensive line dominated up front. You got 4 sacks. You took Nick Chubb's return game and basically threw it in the trash. You did a great job getting a win. Just a little bit tighter than you probably wanted it to be. The Bengals are now sitting at 3-4. They are still a long shot to find themselves in the playoffs, considering the start that they had. They have to keep winning. That's the only way they're going to find themselves in the playoffs right now. And thankfully, things are a little bit complicated in the bottom of the AFC playoff picture with like those 5 through 7 seeds. So there's a chance. They got to keep winning, though. They have a tough matchup next week, I believe, against Philadelphia, if I'm remembering correctly. I could be wrong on that, but I believe it's Philadelphia. But right now, rattling off these wins, they look solid, but they have got to find their run game again, because they've kind of lost it over the last few weeks here. And even Chase Brown looks like he's starting to usurp Zach Moss in the pecking order, so there's a lot going on in that running back room at this current moment here. The Colts at number 19, 4-3, ugly win. This is one of those things where you're 4-3, and I don't even really know if I believe in that 4-3 record, but they are where they are at this current moment here. Anthony Richardson, 10 of 24, 129 yards. He had also 56 yards on the ground off of 14 carries, but another sub 50% completion percentage here. This offense looks better with Joe Flacco under center, and that is not where this Colts team needs to be at this current moment in time right now. I'm hoping things get better for Indianapolis' sake. This is a team that I grew up rooting for, and at this point, like, I'm tired of it. I really am. You let the Miami running backs just absolutely chew you up on the ground for 160 yards off of 31 carries, averaging 5.2 yards a clip. Matt Gay was basically had to win the game for you, going 3 for 3 on field goals, and Rigoberto Sanchez with his 7 punts for 337 net yards punting. Like, when I'm sitting here talking about your special teams having the biggest performance of the day, you know you're not winning games the right way. So I tip my cap to the Colts special teams. Shout out to Sanchez and Gay, because they did a great job keeping this team afloat in this matchup here. But my God, this is an ugly team to watch right now. And I can't believe I'm sitting here saying I would rather see Joe Flacco under center. The Cowboys at number 18 obviously did not play this week. We'll leave them where they are at this current point here. Not really sure of what to make this team, though, sitting at 3-3. We'll talk, obviously, again next week once we see what happens with them this week. At number 17, we're looking at the San Francisco 49ers, and this is a team that at this point here, I don't buy them anymore. The aura that they've carried the last few seasons as the top team in the NFC, that team that could do no wrong, between injuries and just regression in play overall. Brandon Ayuk, done for the season due to his injury. And when you look at Brock Purdy and the way that he's been playing, it feels like he's even regressing a bit with the amount of interceptions he's thrown. 3 against the Chiefs again this past week. Christian McCaffrey is still nowhere to be found. You're still waiting for guys to get back on the defense, and you're sitting at 3-4. This is a team that if the playoffs ended today, you're just outside and you are watching everyone else work their way towards a potential Super Bowl run from the outside looking in. I don't know what the 49ers need to do at this point here, because now they're losing guys as they were waiting for other guys to get back. Brandon Ayuk, that situation is just, that's awful. That is, I feel for the 49ers on that one, because I feel for the 49ers. I even feel for Brandon Ayuk, because, with all the conversation around Ayuk and how, is he worth the money, and not necessarily getting to produce to that level despite being paid all that money, now gets the rest of the season taken away from him, doesn't get the opportunity to prove his worth now. Like, that whole situation is really unfortunate. This team is going in the wrong direction, and they're dealing with the Super Bowl hangover, and they were not the team that won. And that's not the place you want to be. They did not look like a playoff caliber team or anything close to the Super Bowl team that they were last year, going up against the Chiefs in their Super Bowl rematch on their own home turf on top of that. The Buccaneers, sitting at number 16, they tanked far in my power rankings. If you saw at the beginning of this video, the Bucs are pretty high up in the rankings. I believe they were number 9 last week, if I'm remembering correctly. If not, maybe it was number 10, but I believe number 9, maybe even number 8. But the Buccaneers dropping significantly here after taking a really ugly loss to the Baltimore Ravens. That final score made the game look a lot closer than it actually was. A special teams gaffe and an onside recovery made that game look a lot closer than it actually was when it was all said and done. But now, Tampa Bay, who found themselves a pretty strong rushing attack over the last few weeks, is going to really have to lean into it, because who knows just how severe that hamstring is for Mike Evans, depending on how bad that is. He could be missing weeks, maybe even a month or more. Hamstring injuries are always tricky. Godwin, dislocated ankle. Who knows when he's going to be back from that? That's one of those, and it's literally out indefinitely is what they're saying about him right now. Dislocated ankle. That's not like a dislocated finger or a dislocated wrist, or maybe dislocating your shoulder and then just getting it popped back into place. Dislocating an ankle is one of the more complicated injuries you can get, because if there's any ligament or nerve damage, it's one of those things that they've got to figure out what's going on there, and there's no actual timetable for that. So really unfortunate, ugly injury, but the wide receiver room took an absolute beating here, and obviously the conversation coming out of that game was, why was anyone still in that late in the game? And I understand you're competing, competitive nature of the sport. It is what it is. There's nothing you can do. You can't turn back the clock. But my God, this Buccaneers team is going to pretend, I don't want to say gonna, but is going to potentially fall off a cliff if they're losing both their starting receivers, because the wide receiver room beyond them, a little bit thin. The Eagles rounding out the Jeff Fisher group, sitting at 4-2 with their win. Saquon Barkley having a revenge game and ultimately choosing not to break his career high in rushing yards, although I really think if he wanted to, he would have had the opportunity to do so. But it was very clear he wanted the young guys to play instead and not make it about himself. And I respect the hell out of Saquon for doing that. It's a team effort here. There's a lot of noise going on surrounding the Philadelphia Eagles right now, and the only way to really cure that is by winning. And when you're taking down a division rival 28-3, it will do just that. If this team can continue to look like this going forward, all the issues about Nick Sirianni and decision-making, they might still pester and be there, but not quite to the level that I think things got to a few weeks ago. But now that the Eagles are sitting at the record they are, they're just on the outside looking in for me. They do have a good win over the Green Bay Packers in week number 1, but since then, it's just been a very rocky road to that point here. I need to see them get another win before I really feel good about them being a playoff team again, but I'm happy to see them getting back on the right track, because this is a team that just has way too much talent to not be in the running for a playoff spot right now, both offensively and defensively. Moving on to the playoff hopefuls, though, and a big reminder to everyone, because I get these questions every single week. This is how I know people just skip to the end and don't listen to what I have to say. The playoff hopefuls category and the Super Bowl contenders category, between the two, must have 7 AFC and 7 NFC teams. There are 14 playoff spots, 7 for each conference. There must also be a division winner from each of the 8 divisions in the NFL. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this. There might be a team or two in this category that's above a team that is probably better than them in the Jeff Fisher category. That being said, you don't necessarily have to be a better team to get into the playoffs. If you just win your division, or you just happen to be in the weaker conference, you can have a lesser record and be a lesser team and find yourself still playing in the playoffs. That all being said, at number 14, we're looking at the Chargers, who are now sitting at 3-3 following their loss to the Arizona Cardinals. The Bears are at 13, a successful bye week for them as they move up in the power rankings and find themselves in the playoff hopefuls category now. The Broncos are at number 12, Falcons at 11, Seahawks at 10, the Steelers at 9, the Bills at 8, and then the Commanders sitting at number 7. So the Chargers, ball protection, they've got to take care of the football. A lot of mishaps early in the game put them in a tough spot here. But I think the biggest thing for me, inability to finish drives, 5 field goals, not going to win you a football game. Just ask the Steelers, because they've lost games where they've had to kick 6 field goals. You have to score touchdowns. And one of the biggest issues that we are watching from this Chargers team, and it was something that was talked about a lot coming into the season, is a lack of true number one talent on that offensive side of the roster here. They do not have a number one wide receiver. Will Dissly had himself quite a performance here, but between him and maybe Ladd McConkey and Josh Palmer, you're missing that guy who's supposed to take all the attention away from them to really open them up and have those type of games. Or maybe just make that 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 really big plays that'll put you in a position to score. The Chargers need to be considering going after someone at the trade deadline. There's a few guys that could potentially be available, especially if a few games break the right way. Like the way I see it right now, if the Bengals lose another game or two potentially over the next couple of weeks, there's a good shot you could maybe trade for a guy like T. Higgins. Like there are opportunities available for you. If the 49ers keep sputtering, maybe Deebo Samuel is available for you. Like there's a lot that could be made available to you in the next couple of weeks as the trade deadline approaches. And remember, it got pushed back another week. I believe the deadline's now week number 9. So you have time before you need to pull the trigger on a trade like that. We already saw a handful of receivers get dealt already, so the market's already moving. But the Chargers need to find themselves a number one receiver. The Bears sitting at number 13, taking advantage of some teams just sucking big time this past week and leapfrogging their way into the playoff hopefuls category. We have every single team in the NFC North currently sitting in a playoff hopeful to Super Bowl contender section of these rankings here. The likelihood of all 4 of these teams making the playoffs, I am well aware, is not necessarily likely. That being said, as it currently stands with the Bears at 4-2 and could, I guess, considered the weakest team of the division at this point here, although they have a pretty stout defense and an offense that seems to be finding itself, this is just the way the NFL looks right now. I really need a key victory from Chicago over a good opponent to really feel good about them right now. But at this point here, when I look at some of the teams that are vying for number 7, 8, 9 in the NFC, the Eagles are a team that you could argue maybe need to be in this spot instead of the Chicago Bears. But right now, with the struggles that we've seen from Philadelphia, if they ran into Chicago's defense and with how porous we've seen Philadelphia's defense be at certain times this year, I don't know if it's a guarantee that Philadelphia knocks off the Bears. So, that's kind of where I'm sitting with my head right now as far as the Bears go. They are the number 7 team in the NFC for me at this current moment. There's an argument to be made that maybe a team or two should be above them, but I like my thinking and just my argument for Chicago right now. Really good defense, an offense that's starting to click. They're starting to find a running game. DeAndre Swift's starting to get some carries, get some good looks. And on top of that, Caleb Williams feels like he's getting more and more comfortable as the weeks go by. The Broncos at number 12, sitting at 4-3. The defense. This defense is very much real. Beating up on bad teams. They had 6 sacks this past week. They're stifling good teams on top of that. The Broncos are sitting at 4-3, and every single loss they have is a tight one-possession loss. It's not like they've gotten their butts kicked or anything like that. Every single game they've been involved in, they've either been competitive or they're winning handedly like they did this past Thursday night. Javonte Williams got going on the ground. He had a really good performance as well, 14 carries for 88 yards and a couple of touchdowns. It feels like this Broncos team might be figuring things out. As the season goes on, Bo Nix should get more and more comfortable. He really struggles with pressure, but beyond that, he looks really good with his decision-making to run with his legs, and when he's not under pressure, he looks like an NFL caliber quarterback. It's just when things break down and it gets a little crazy, his decision making is a little bit crazy as well. But I like the way that the Broncos are trending right now. The Falcons sitting at 4-3 at number 11. This was just a flat out ugly game here. You want to talk about just a bad game from start to finish. You have a team traveling all the way from the Northeast, making their way to essentially the southeast of the country. This is like the second longest within the U.S. type of travel distance you can get, other than like Seattle going to, I guess, Miami would be the furthest you could possibly make the travel. So like, this is about as far as it gets. You should have the advantage in this one here. They're coming to see you. It's your home turf. On top of that, the Seahawks coming in this game, they didn't have a win over a team that was better than 500 to this point here. Like, their resume has not been that impressive. You've been winning, really good games. You've had some really, really tight losses against good competition. A lot of people looked at Atlanta like a legitimate playoff team. Now, they still are, but that was a crazy performance to have against a team that a lot of people were considering, after going 3-0 and then falling to 3-3, kind of like the fraudulent of the NFC teams. Now, you get knocked off, and now people are going to be questioning you like I kind of am right now. I will say Kirk has seen better games. This defense is not performing to the level that it needs to be, considering the amount of talent that they have. I know that there's injuries and whatnot that have affected certain spots on the defense, but overall, this Falcons team is not where I think they should be record-wise. This is a team that should be 5-2 at worst, maybe even a little bit better, but the defense has not quite lived up to the hype, and it just took the offense, I think, a little bit longer than you would have liked to get going. The running game is really starting to open up. Bijan Robinson's looking really good now. And I mean, like, I love Kyle Pitts, Drake London, all the threats you guys have as skill position players in Atlanta. Exciting stuff, don't get me wrong, but just not a good game whatsoever from start to finish. The Seahawks right above them at number 10, 4-3 as well. Much needed victory over a team that has a record above 500, like I just mentioned here. DK Metcalf obviously going down in this game here. He's considered week to week with that grade 1 MCL sprain, I believe is what it is, but it sounds like he's trying to play on Sunday. That's a little bit crazy to me, but DK Metcalf is a larger-than-life human being, and I'm sure is tough as nails. So if he's trying to play, I don't really think anyone's going to tell him no if he thinks he can. The person I want to highlight is Kenneth Walker. When this guy is healthy, he is unbelievable. If he can just stay healthy, things will be wide open in the passing game for Geno Smith to do his thing, and it'll help disguise some of the issues you have on the offensive line over there in Seattle. I really like what's going on here, and the defense is finally kind of getting put back together after the amount of injuries that decimated that side of the ball the last few weeks here. So keep an eye on the Seahawks. They could be trending in a better direction right now, especially with a statement victory going into Atlanta the way they did. But I do like where this team is at least kind of positioning themselves right now as we reach like the bulk port, like that bulk middle part of the season. This is kind of like the dog days of the season before things really start to ramp up by like Thanksgiving. Looking at number 9, the Pittsburgh Steelers sitting at 5-2. I was really worried about the decision to go to Russell Wilson. It's not because I didn't believe in Russell Wilson. I think I need to make that abundantly clear. I actually talked very highly about Russell Wilson coming into the season. My fear was that you have a team sitting on 4 wins and just 2 losses through your first 6 games, and you're just making a quarterback switch for the sake of making the quarterback switch because you said you would. That was my concern. I was never really that concerned about Russell Wilson's play, and I will say a few of those passes early made me almost want to fall out of my chair, but I'm happy that this worked out the way it did. This is the best case scenario. Russell Wilson comes in, he throws a couple of touchdowns, he throws for like 250. It was a good game for them, both offensively, defensively. They had a really good game as well. That defensive front, especially now that Alex Highsmith is back in there, is going to just continue to get even better and more dangerous as the season goes on. The defense was allowed just 3 conversions on 10 attempts. They had 5 tackles for loss, and then like you have George Pickens, who it literally feels like he's good for at least 2 circus catches a game at this point now. So it's like you have all the makings of a legit playoff contender, hell, even arguably a potential Super Bowl contender right now. If we keep getting this from Russell Wilson, I still like the idea of Fields as the future guy, but if Mike Tomlin's mind is made up and the offense just simply didn't look good enough, so be it. Justin Fields was still sitting on a 10 touchdown to 1 turnover ratio. So, I mean, I don't really know how you can look at him and go, you didn't really do good enough. It is what it is. Hopefully this continues to work out. I will say, though, my concerns were definitely pushed to the side, and Mike Tomlin is obviously a head coach of an NFL football team for a reason, one of the best for a reason, because he's willing to make a decision like this in a pivotal game, and you get the job done. So I tip my cap to Mike Tomlin there. Bills at 5-2. Falling down 10-0 was crazy. I've got to say that first and foremost, but the 34 unanswered points after that, can make it forgivable. But there was a moment early in that game where I really thought Buffalo was, and I talked about it in my preview of that game, that I basically flat out said, I was like, Buffalo has no reason to lose this game. They have no business losing that game. But if they do lose that game, it's because they're too busy just thinking about what's coming up next and not focusing on the opponent in front of them. And when I saw that 10-0 score to start, I was like, oh, what is going on, Buffalo? But again, turning the ship around here, defense tough as nails, despite the amount of injuries and just how in such a bad way the defense currently is right now, with just suspensions and players being injured and things like that. They're still performing at a pretty high level. Josh Allen continuing his mistake-free season now. Someone who would get laughed out of the bar over how many turnovers he has in a single season every single year is currently sitting on 15 touchdowns total, rushing and throwing, passing, and 0 turnovers. This is not the same Josh Allen I think we've seen from the last few years. The cape is still there. He can still very much take over a game, but he is doing a fantastic job of taking care of that football, and he is playing at an MVP type level. Right now, if I was to pick like 3 guys that are in the MVP conversation, Josh Allen's absolutely in that conversation. The other 2, probably like Jared Goff and Lamar Jackson. Those are like the top 3 in my opinion. Commanders sitting at number 7, sitting at 5-2 right now, 40 points hung, even when you don't have Jaden Daniels for the entirety of that matchup there. Started off with that Dante Fowler pick 6, and then they just never really looked back. Defense nearly pitched a shutout. I always hate when teams get those garbage time touchdowns, especially when a team's pitching a shutout. It makes me want to rip my hair out. But regardless, a 40-7 victory is a statement nonetheless. The defense looked fantastic in this game here as they took a far lesser opponent and just kind of beat them into the ground. Brian Robinson and Jeremy McNichols looking like a 1-2 punch. Austin Eckler, for what it's worth, is just kind of slowly it feels like he's kind of getting phased out of the offense altogether. I think he had like 3 or 4 carries in that matchup, whereas Brian Robinson and Jeremy McNichols were just kind of doing their thing, ground and pound. You had Marcus Mariota just absolutely dealing. My first concern when Jaden Daniels goes down is, oh my God, this offense is about to fall off a cliff. And then in comes Marcus Mariota in 2024, and he's just hucking dimes all over the field, like throwing strikes. And I'm sitting here at work as this is happening, with a bunch of others as we're, taking in all these games here. And there goes Marcus Mariota driving down the field, touchdown pass here, touchdown pass there. He's throwing just strikes. Cannot believe what I'm witnessing here. Hopefully Jaden Daniels is good. We have a Washington Commanders, Chicago Bears matchup next week. I hope the rib's okay and that he's able to play. I do not want the football gods robbing us from that potential matchup. That is one I would love to see. And then to wrap it up, the Super Bowl Contenders section, the top 6 teams in the league right now. The larger Super Bowl Contenders section than we've had the last few weeks here. At number 6, we're looking at the Houston Texans. At number 5, the Green Bay Packers. At number 4, we have the at number 4, we have the Minnesota Vikings. Misspoke there. At number 3, we have the Baltimore Ravens. At number 2, the Detroit Lions. And then at number 1, the Kansas City Chiefs. So the Texans at 5-2. Both of their losses now are to playoff teams. That is definitely something you can't ignore to this point here. Obviously, the blowout loss to Minnesota stands out big time, and then you have just a really tight loss that you lose to the Green Bay Packers. You go down swinging. C.J. Stroud has what is probably his second worst game of his career as far as numbers and passer rating are concerned here. Just 86 yards, 10 of 24. Not a good game by any means. Not a good game by any means for him. Joe Mixon, thankfully, him being on this team is is like far and away one of the more underrated additions to this offense, because in his 3 games that he has played for Houston, he's gone for more than 100 yards rushing on the ground, and is a big reason why this attack can be balanced. Or you can have CJ Stroud's second worst performance since coming into the league and still be fighting for a win at the very final seconds of the game here. Ultimately, the defense bends a little too much, puts Green Bay into field goal position. They obviously steal the win from you here, but I still feel good about the Texans as one of the top teams in the AFC. I mean, you have the quarterback, you have all the talent. They don't have Nico Collins right now, and I think if Nico Collins is in there, this is probably a different conversation that we're having. But I was a little bit shocked. I would have thought CJ Stroud would have his way with a defense in Green Bay that's been a little bit leaky so far this season and hasn't necessarily been the greatest against the pass. The Packers at number 5 with Jordan Love. 3 touchdowns, couple of interceptions, made that game a little bit more complicated than they probably wanted it to be, because without those picks, Green Bay probably walks away with a little bit more of a handed type of victory here. But the defense, again, as I mentioned, handing CJ Stroud one of the worst games of his career here. Josh Jacobs, another running back addition from this past offseason, but this one for Green Bay, proving to be worth just every single penny for this team. The balance of this offense as well has helped out Jordan Love tremendously. The fact that they don't have to necessarily rely on him to throw for over 400 yards and need to throw for 4 touchdowns because you have a running back like Josh Jacobs that defenses have to respect is paying off huge. And I mean, the very young, but oh so talented wide receiver room that they currently have in Green Bay is arguably one of the best in the league right now and could compete with just about any other group in the league. Like, that basically went head to head with another extremely talented wide receiver room in Houston and got the victory. Again, Nico Collins out, but it is what it is. You can only match up against who is there against you that week. But I tip my cap to the Packers. They looked really good this week, and that was a big performance, in my opinion, defensively for this team, because that's been kind of the weakness, in my opinion, for Green Bay so far this season. Has been the defensive side of the ball, especially against the pass, and they really looked good against a really good quarterback in CJ Stroud. The Ravens sitting at 4-2. Lamar Jackson. I'm sorry, 5-2. I might have forgotten to add the win to this. I don't know. Have the Ravens had a bye week yet? I think they're 5-2. Lamar Jackson tossing his name into the MVP hat, like I mentioned earlier. It's him, it's Jared Goff, and it's Josh Allen. Those are the 3 guys vying for that award at this point, in my opinion, right now. You have 5 touchdowns, 330 yards total. For every, and I feel like I say this every time he has a great game, for every single person who has called Lamar Jackson a running back and not a quarterback, eat your freaking heart out, because we're looking at 280 yards through the air, 5 passing touchdowns, a big FU from Lamar Jackson, and I love it. Derrick Henry goes for another $170 on the ground. He gets a touchdown. Marlon Humphrey had a couple of interceptions. Unfortunately, that second one basically knocked him out for the game, but the defense looked really good for the most part. Things got a little bit wonky late in that game. The onside kick kind of complicated some stuff and made that game get really close for no reason, essentially, because the Tampa Bay was just simply down by too much, running out of timeouts. Like, the entire situation looks closer than it actually was if you weren't actually watching what was going on there. Baltimore being up 10 in that situation when they're trying to kill the timeouts that Tampa Bay has, Lamar and Derrick Henry aren't even in the lineup at this point, even though this is all going on around them. They knew the game was in the bag and they just had to basically burn the timeouts and they'd be okay. But ultimately, the Ravens have rounded out into one of the best teams in the league. And I really cannot believe that they're sitting at the record they're sitting at, because they should not have that loss to the Raiders. The NFL's so weird, because you have a Raiders team right now that is sitting at the bottom of the NFL right now as, in my opinion, the 6th worst team in the league, I guess you could say, based off my rankings. And then you have them taking down the Ravens in Baltimore in a 10-point comeback type of situation there. That doesn't make sense. And then you're basically a toenail away from having stolen the week 1 matchup against the Chiefs too. This Ravens team could be undefeated. And that's insane, because a lot of people were worried about them a couple of weeks into the season, myself included. I still believe in them. I have not considered them anything less than a playoff team all year long, despite the 0-2 start. But it's incredible to see where Baltimore is and consider just how close they are to being the lone undefeated team in the NFL right now, as opposed to it being the Chiefs. Now, the Vikings because I accidentally skipped over them. I have them flipped in my notes. So the Vikings sitting at number 4 and then the Ravens at number 3. I have them flipped in my notes here by mistake. I forgot to change them. But the Ravens at 3, the Vikings at number 4. This Vikings team is legit. That is my biggest takeaway from this week. I don't know what exactly it's going to take for me to buy into Sam Darnold. He had a really good game, really bad interception that honestly, if that doesn't end up getting picked, we're probably having a different conversation because the Vikings are still undefeated and arguably the second best team in the NFL still, considered all things considered. But the way I see it right now, this defense is so good. They are so aggressive. And on top of that, they win in such crucial situations. If it wasn't for that first half stall after the 10 points you got initially out of the gates, you had a real chance to run away with things. But just the offense, again, kind of hit the brakes in the first half, go into the locker room, you come out at halftime, and boom, it's right back to it. A couple of field goals, get another touchdown, like you're feeling a lot better. If it's not for that stall, they're coming away with a win here. I mean, you lost by a hair. You literally lost by a hair at the end of that game. So I believe in the Vikings. I do consider them one of the best teams in the league. The Sam Darnold thing is one of those things that it's just going to be in the back of my mind. But at this point, I will at least accept that he's playing well enough that he can carry this team to the playoffs and potentially as a legit contender with how good the system is around him, the talent that he has around him. He's making some money throws too. So I got to tip my cap to what he's doing. But shout out to the Minnesota Vikings, man, because you even in a loss, I don't really know if it sucks you lose, but you don't really come away that big of a loser in that matchup. At number 2, we have the Detroit Lions sitting at 5-1. Jared Goff, 22 of 25, 280 yards, 2 touchdowns, 11.2 yards per attempt, an 88% completion percentage. Jared Goff is probably the front runner for the MVP award. Lamar Jackson on Monday night may have had something to say about that, though, with just that massive performance he had. But if I had to order the 3 guys that I keep mentioning now, it's probably Jared Goff, Lamar Jackson, 1AB, and then Josh Allen at number 2. I do think that Lamar Jackson and Jared Goff are legitimately dueling for that award right now, and they are both putting it, and we've heard it from both these guys. Neither one of them really seem like they're too concerned about the award. They want to win more than anything else. Like Lamar already has 2 MVPs. I don't think he could give a rat's ass whether he wins another one or not. And Jared Goff, I think, wants to win that Super Bowl that he feels he got taken from him watching the Rams win without him. So both of these guys are hell-bent on winning a championship and are doing so by putting together MVP performances at the same time, which is a beautiful thing to watch. It's one thing when a player's just playing at a high level and it's about them, but these guys are literally just trying their absolute best to win for their teams and get that championship. And in the process, they just happen to be putting up wildly impressive MVP campaigns. The defense, without Aiden Hutchinson, racks up 4 sacks. Safety Brian Branch is a baller. He had a big interception, his 4th on the season. Jahmyr Gibbs had 116 on the ground. He had a couple of touchdowns, 7.7 yards per attempt. This Lions team, it sucks that Aiden Hutchinson's done for the year. The conversation now is he could be back in time for the Super Bowl because that was a clean break, no ligament damage or anything like that. If he comes back and the Lions happen to be in the Super Bowl, that would be one of the craziest things I think I'll ever witness in sports in my life, just considering how bad that injury looked. But right now, the Lions, definitively, they're the top dogs in the NFC after that win over Minnesota. Then the Chiefs sitting at number 1, undefeated. The defense, 3 interceptions off of Brock Purdy. Big performances on their side. Kareem Hunt has been huge for this team. When Isaiah Pacheco goes down and it's clear Carson Steele's not going to be the guy to save your running back room, in comes Kareem Hunt, and it feels like it's 2018 all over again. He has been great for the ground game. He has kept this offense balanced, even when Patrick Mahomes is struggling right now and not looking like the Mahomes that we've come to know with a couple of interceptions in this game. It just was not a good game for him by any stretch of the imagination. The offense is in that position again, pretty similar to last year, except we're not dealing with just like boneheaded drops and mistakes. It's just, it feels like the rhythm is kind of off right now because you're missing so many key guys. But this offense is making mistakes. They're trying to figure themselves out as they go. They thankfully have 11 more games to figure it out before they actually hit playoff time. But in this entire process, they are still 6-0. And I took the Chiefs out of the number 1 spot one time this season. And I think about that literally every single week I sit down to do this because I can't believe I did that. The Chiefs are the best team in the league. They're the last undefeated team left in the league. They can literally hang with anyone, even when their offense looks like crap. They can still hang with anyone because that defense is still so good. Mahomes will make plays even when he's having a bad game when it matters most. And their offense is still balanced enough that they can be successful on the ground. They can be successful through the air. And again, they still get those big plays when they need them to have happen. But the defense is really what's keeping this team alive. And I cannot stress that enough. What Steve Spagnuolo is doing over there is unbelievable because you have so many guys that are being paid like pennies on the dollar. When you look at their actual roster, like if you go on like a website like SpoTrack and you look at the money being paid, it's basically Chris Jones and then everybody else on that defense. There's really not a ton of big money guys on the Chiefs roster as a whole. A lot of the money goes to literally Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones, and Travis Kelce. And then, no, not even, because Trent McDuffie, I think, is still in his rookie contract. Yeah, you're really not allocating a ton of money to anyone besides like those big 3 names. And Travis Kelce's not even performing like Travis Kelce from a few years ago when he was getting all that money handed to him. So it's like, this is the best team in the league. They win every single week. You can call me a Glazer. You can say that I'm fanboying over the Chiefs. I'm not a Chiefs fan. I could give a rat's ass what the Chiefs are doing. I just respect what they're doing. Plain and simple. They're the top dog in the NFL. But those are my rankings. Let me know in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts, your opinions? What do you agree? What do you disagree with? Feel free to say whatever you want. Insult me. I do not care. But let me hear from you. That being said, if you made it to the end, as always, I greatly appreciate it. I'll check you all next time. Have a good one.